Did you know that one of the most effective ways to protect our rainforests is to give directly to the people living there? Then you'll really enjoy today's episode together with Matthew Owen from Cool Earth. You will learn how a call with a tribal leader helped shape the way they operate as a charity.
When we were putting together our business model, he had got a call from a tribal leader in central Peru to say, we have 8 out of 10 of our children with malnutrition. We have levels of malaria we've never seen, and we're really struggling. The only thing we can sell is our trees, and we've got loggers turning up every other week, as they always do, chancing their arm, seeing if anyone will sell off a cedar or a mahogany.
Why giving directly is such an effective way to help local communities.
Providing the most unconditional resource there is does 2 things. One, it puts all in their court, but also it just shows trust. We trust them to do the right thing. Giving them cash means that they just have the power to make decisions, to figure out how they make life better for themselves, for their children, how they address vulnerabilities, how they make themselves more resilient.
And how they are implementing their version of universal basic income in the rainforest.
Doing this costs a fraction of what is being invested in rainforest protection using traditional conservation approaches. It's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of what's going into climate finance to address this issue. And at the end of the day, you have 400 million people living in the rainforest. You have 1.2 billion who are depending on those rainforests for their livelihoods. It's a very, very cost-effective way of just keeping those people safe and living lives which they have chosen for themselves over the long term, because without it, the rainforest being destroyed is going to cause extraordinary problems for so many, many people.
Hello and welcome to the Impactful Ninja Show. I'm your host, Dennis Kamprad, and today we're joined by Matthew Owen from Cool Earth. Matthew, welcome.
Great to be here, Dennis.
My pleasure. Now, before we get started into telling your journey and your story, give us a brief overview. What is Cool Earth and what are you doing there?
Okay, so Cool Earth is a very straightforward charity that does one thing, give humanity a fighting chance of overcoming the climate crisis. Tropical rainforests, which we all know are under threat, account for 10-15% of all emissions. What's worse is that the more we cut down, the more likely that will accelerate. And the amount of carbon they're putting into the atmosphere makes it impossible, even with every other measure in place, to actually stabilise our climate. Now, protecting rainforests should be very straightforward, as we'll get onto. There are lots of different ways of doing it. We found that the best possible way is supporting the people who live there. It's unrivaled in terms of the impact it has in terms of just supporting Indigenous and local communities. And what we do is provide a no-frills way of supporting those people in real time. Simple as that.
Beautiful. Now, before we get a little bit deeper into this and have a look at your programs more in details as well, let's rewind your story a little bit. What did you do before joining Cool Earth and what's your background?
As with all of us, I've done a few things. I've taught, I've worked for another charity many, many years ago, but most of my career was in investment banking, where I worked in something called equity research. So I used to value companies, analyse if it was a goodie or a baddie, and make recommendations.
Wow, that's quite a shift from investment banking to heading a charity, you know?
It is and it isn't. So I think in terms of analysing what works and what doesn't, building a case for investors or donors is pretty similar. But I agree, it's a lot more fulfilling doing what I do now. Yes,
no, I fully know that feeling. Because I started in consulting, I originally went into for sustainability management, only figuring out there wasn't that many projects, and I was not fulfilled there. I learned a lot, and it helps a lot in the journey now in the project, but it's different.
Absolutely.
Nice. How did the transition then happen for you? So you worked in investment banking. You mentioned that you're feeling much more fulfilled now. What happened in between that let you get into the world of charities?
I came to the decision, I was coming up to my 40s, so, who knows, a midlife crisis, thinking now I can probably change career, I can do something different. And a few people I knew were aware of this, and one of them asked me to do a little bit of, side research for them, which is namely rainforests, great things, motherhood and apple pie. They are probably top 2 in terms of the priorities for the environmental movement, but for 50 years, we've been protecting them, and 20%, 30% have gone. Why have we failed so spectacularly to address this priority that pretty much everyone shares as a concern? And that was a bit of research I did. I had 6 months to do it. I talked to some really interesting people. I talked to people in pretty much every rainforest region in the world, and came up with a few suggestions. And from there, we thought, well, let's dip our toe in to see if these ideas will work, and created Cool Earth.
Oh, wow. And how was the transition for you at the very beginning from doing some probably very structured work at investment banking to doing all the research, figuring out there's a problem you want to solve, as you mentioned, you're feeling much more fulfilled now doing something that really has a positive impact. How did you get started and with the first steps of Cool Earth?
It's really tough. I've become institutionalized, very happily so, very, very well paid. And, I got up at, 5 every morning and arrived in the office to talk to Asia and then talk to Europe. And anyway, it was quite a steep change of habits. But once I actually, figured out that I can just go down any rabbit hole, I don't have to figure out what the answer is in, 2 hours or 2 days. It became tremendously, good fun. And it continues to be good fun. I mean, the reason that I've been, so proud to be with Cool Earth is because we've achieved such great things. We work with such great people. We have an extraordinary team. But also, it's just really good fun because I get to be curious about really thorny issues on a day-to-day basis.
That's the most fulfilling part for me as well. And also, as you mentioned, like so many, like from being institutionalized to kind of figuring out everything on the way. One saying that I heard just recently, which I think fits perfectly, is like, you don't have to figure out like the whole alphabet of everything that you want to do. The only thing that you really have to figure out is kind of A, B, and C at the very end. What do you want to do now? What's your next step? And what is your goal? And then let's see what all the steps are in between.
That's so true. And I think the thing that makes, careers fulfilling is that, you really don't know how you get from B to C because many, many things will open up. And within, the work that I've done with Cool Earth and, the work the team's done, it's all about, dreadful term, iteration.
Yes.
Because we started off with an idea and we did a really good pure play version of that idea early on. And then actually we went down lots of, not blind alleys, but we slightly deviated and did what we thought charity should do. So it was actually making those mistakes and iterating back to a slightly clearer path that one has, created far more impact for the organization, but also has been far more interesting because it's actually, the mistakes you take are the ones that you learn from.
Yes. Walk us through this journey, like from the beginning, like finding out like a lot of different paths to finding, okay, what is the one that has the most impact, and maybe also highlighting some of the mistakes that you learned from on the way.
This could take all day. Okay. So we launched in June the 5th, 2007, which just happened to be Environment Day. It was lucky. And we launched with some just extraordinary backers who believed in our idea. And the idea was very straightforward, back people in the rainforest to do what they've done for decades of years and have an unrivaled, reputation in terms of delivering rainforest protection. Let's just back them. So we launched with a couple of fantastic articles written for us by Sir David Attenborough, and we put together a fantastic board with the likes of Tony Juniper and Professor Johan Rockstrom, some really, top-notch climate scientists. And we put a very straightforward offer in front of the public, which is if you give Cool Earth money, we will minimize our overhead as much as we can and deliver that cash very quickly, very efficiently to rainforest communities. And that's basically how we presented ourselves. The rainforest communities we started to work for were ones in Peru with the Ashaninka, and we had a really huge bit of good luck in the early days, which was working with, sadly now departed from us, an anthropologist called Dilwyn Jenkin, who had worked with the Ashaninka in Peru for 30 odd years. When we were putting together our business model, he had got a call from a tribal leader in central Peru to say, we have 8 out of 10 of our children with malnutrition. We have levels of malaria we've never seen, and we're really struggling. The only thing we can sell is our trees, and we've got loggers turning up every other week, as they always do, chancing their arm, seeing if anyone will sell off a cedar or a mahogany. So we said, well, how about if we gave you $10,000? It arrives in cash for you. You decide how you distribute that amongst your community, and would that help? And he said, yeah, well, let's give it a go, as you would. And basically that was the first bit of basic income, universal cash transfer, however you like to put it, that Cool Earth did. And we continue to work with that Ashaninka village, and we continue to work with around 100 in that area. We continue to work with many in the north of Peru. We continue to work ones in Papua New Guinea, who they added on later, and in the Congo rainforest. And that simple idea that people who live in the rainforest, who find themselves vulnerable, who find themselves struggling with, drivers of deforestation, often the only people who are prepared to give them cash, the way in which we help them do what they've done a fantastic job of for so many years is providing resources. And those resources are unconditional. Those resources have no strings attached because they know the best way to use them. And we continue to do that to this day.
Isn't that amazing to see that so many times of like so many programs, it's always like we have the money, and because we have the money and all the resources, we think that we might know what is best for you because you're not in a position where you have, and for you, you flip that completely on the head. And I've seen so many like in different regions and different studies around this, how it empowers people really to do, okay, what would be most impactful in their specific situation, their knowledge and their environment.
Yeah, you're spot on. You put it much better than I do. I mean, I kind of say to the team, what would you prefer at the end of each month? I can give you, some cash from payroll, or I can, teach you to fish. I can build you a solar generator. And I think the environmental movement, but also charities in general, are very tied to the teach a man to fish is far better than, giving him a fish. And, maybe, there are no fish. Maybe that's not the right choice. Actually giving him, more importantly, her, and mums are the main recipients of most of our cash transfers, giving them cash means that they just have the power to make decisions, to figure out how they, make life better for themselves, for their children, how they address vulnerabilities, how they make themselves more resilient. All the things that we in Europe or North America would always ask for ourselves.
So basically, instead of using your money to buy them fish, giving money to them to decide what might be much better suited than fish and what helps them prepare to come up with a solution that, is much more sustainable than something they might not even need in that moment.
So I was just going to say, going back to your earlier point, the mistakes we made, often we would get, I suppose, a bit cocky and think, why don't we do something a bit more extravagant and maybe develop a sanitation plan, or maybe we can develop some, training, women's entrepreneurship, access to college, all great things, all really important things that, people are very grateful for. But there are ideas, and therefore they were kind of delivered in community, probably not in the best way. Probably they weren't the priorities people were looking for, and they never therefore had the traction. Whereas providing the most unconditional resource there is does two things. One, it puts, the ball in their court, but also it just shows trust. We trust them to do the right thing, and goodness, have the communities we've been lucky enough to work with done that.
Also, going back to your model, when it comes to marketing messages, like let's just say I'm a potential donor, and there's two websites I can have a look at. One website shows like a really nice fledged out program on like all the initiatives they research and they're gonna do, and the other program shows like, let's just simplify it a little bit more. You give us money, we give money to the communities. Have there been any challenges from you to communicate that actually what seems to be so much simpler is the much more effective way?
You're absolutely right. And just as I said, there's a tendency for charities to kind of have a standard look and a standard call for action. I think a lot of donors, a lot of people who are supporting charities also are happier in that mindset where they see a child, afflicted by a dreadful disease or suffering from dreadful, malnutrition, the consequences of poverty, and saying, if you support this fantastic European, slightly paternalistic organization, they will step in and do the right thing. So actually presenting ourselves as saying, we don't have any silver bullet. We're not, the saviors here. All we've stumbled upon, very luckily, and as everyone should do, is 300 studies that show very clearly in black and white that the best thing you can possibly do, both for poverty alleviation, but more importantly, from where we stand, for conservation, is just by giving people money. That's the way you should go. So we have always had and been very lucky to have a group of curious supporters who are willing to dig, who will look into our stories, look into our narratives, and actually ask for a great deal more impact data than you might expect, because they like the idea. They like the idea that there's a clever way that you can have far more impact, far less money, but they want to be persuaded. So early on, we had people like the Effective Altruists and Mr. McCaskill looking at us, and they gave us very high star ratings, said, this is the way forward. We're also even more lucky to find yourselves who I think, approve of the simplicity, the cost effectiveness and the fairness of our approach. And they are pretty much our donor base now. It's people who have, dug under the surface, looked at this for more than just, some feel-good images of, the narrative of charity, and decided to back us on the basis of, the evidence of impact.
Probably also helps that you now have a track record of stories that you can share with your donors or potential donors based on, we gave the money to this community, this is what they did with it.
I think you're right. I think track record's really important. Yeah. Also, just being able to go back to the people you've worked with and say, one, how long have we worked with you? 15 years. They can demonstrate it. And what have been the good and what have been the bad things, and get them to be very honest to a third party, to someone who isn't us. Because I actually think having some transparency, having some honesty about how INGOs like ourselves have sometimes, not done quite so well, but have always learned from that and improved things is really important, because people aren't just worried about the impact of the final cause. They're wanting to make sure that you're actually doing it in a way that, they would be proud of and you should be proud of.
Nice. Before we go a little bit deeper into your program as well, to see how that has developed, you briefly mentioned like the good and the bad things. What would be some key highlights of the good and the bad things you learned in working together with these communities?
The bad things, I suppose, is when we made a misstep and we've decided to invest in things which weren't appropriate. And it meant that sometimes we wasted 2 years focusing on an area of endeavour. I don't know what it could be. It could be sesame farming. It could be, coffee storage, a whole bunch of things, which we regarded as very important in terms of improving livelihoods, which everyone bought into. But in actual fact, they would make much better decisions than us in terms of livelihood investments. So I suppose those are the bad things. We also had obviously COVID, which was dreadful, but actually had a huge silver lining. Dreadful in terms of we work with communities who have really clear understandings of the consequences of disease coming from the outside. And they closed down dramatically and really meant that they were isolated in a way that they hadn't been for, decades. And we can, do our work in the way we were. Our teams weren't able to go in. The great bonus, though, is that we realized actually we could still give them cash. We could still wire money. We could still put it on phones. And this kind of supercharged our move away from these programs, which sometimes, had too much of our authorship in than they should have done, and meant that we now have incredibly able teams who do the bare minimum, do extraordinary work harder than you've ever seen, but actually don't interfere if they don't need to, which is something that is sometimes, what you wouldn't associate with charities, but is actually absolutely key in terms of being able to scale efficiently.
It's beautiful. It reminds me I talked with the CEO of Soy Empowers just the other week, and he had a similar approach in terms of, they figured out a program that was so much more effective than all the other programs. And that was not them going in much deeper, was like them kind of removing themselves a little more. They had like one charity worker for like 1,000 people they were supporting, and just like letting them do what they know the best. And it reminds me, it's kind of, you have a program that you found is just much more effective, and that also kind of allows you to remove yourself and let the people impacted do the work.
It's exactly that. It also, though, is a really important issue in terms of making yourself understandable as an organisation to everyone. And this seems an odd thing, but actually explaining what Cool Earth is and what our priorities are and why we're here today is something that is not always straightforward to anyone, whether it be yourself, my family, or the people we work with. Whereas if you say, we're giving you cash because whatever you've done, whatever secret sauce you bring to the party is something that we want to put money into and support. And we're not going to tell you what to do. We're not going to tell you what not to do, but just do what you're doing. And that is actually a far easier thing to do than arriving with some great, bureaucracy that will do X, Y, and Z over the next 5 years. And at 3 years, we'll do this, because many Indigenous groups and local communities throughout the rainforest have experienced that from other charities, and they know that they disappear after 3 years. They disappear after 1 year sometimes. Whereas we have, really good decade plus track records of just being there. And that's the most important thing in terms of, as I alluded to earlier, building trust, but also building longevity, because they realize that, this is something they can bet on for the long term.
I think that's a beautiful transition also to have a closer look into your programs. So what are the current programs that you're doing, and maybe are there any new programs that you've started implementing?
Yeah, always trying to improve and finesse things. So we do one big area of work, and this is primarily in Peru and Papua New Guinea, where we give large grants to community associations. And these are tremendously transparent, auditable, elected committees that change each year. And they have grants that they use however they wish to. And this locally alleged approach is a very effective way of developing community assets, which is chosen by the communities, are prioritized in a very clear sort of queue over a number of years, and clearly has benefits for everyone. In many cases, though, the money is used not for building a Casa Comunal or some more fish ponds. It's used just for providing cash to every mother in the community ahead of the new school year, providing a bag of rice to every family when a drought or floods more often have meant a harvest failed. And this is a really effective, straightforward way. And we've done that for now getting on for, as I say, 15, 16 years. It works well. We're happy to do it pretty much wherever. And more importantly, the partners we have in the rainforest value it tremendously highly. So we do that. Another thing we do, and this is slightly different, but it's really important, is that we notice that if you or I wanted to look at rainforest loss in, let's say, the Satipo area of Peru, we could get out our laptop, follow a couple of links, and we could see high-resolution data on the canopy. And not just the canopy, the height of the canopy, the carbon storage of the canopy, all these things in about 2 to 3 minutes. Genuinely, it's so easy and it's so easily available. The fact that the people who live there don't have this same ability to actually see what's going on in their region seems absurd. So using something we call Rainforest Labs, we've put a lot of investment into just making sure that the people in the rainforest who have done the best job of keeping it safe are able to actually see what's going on in real time at high resolution in a way that we take for granted. Now, this is really important because it helps with planning, it helps with defending tenure, it helps with understanding where the threats are, but it also just means that when it comes to actually understanding the value of the rainforest, these people are on a level pegging with everyone else. So that's a really interesting project, and it's led by a fantastic team who have come up with some extraordinarily clever technical solutions to having very good satellite broadband arriving in many, many rainforest villages. So we're doing that. And then the thing that's coming down the track that we're really excited about is taking the locally led unconditional grants to communities, often where that money then goes to families, and then taking it one step further and us transferring it directly to families. And we sometimes call this basic income. We sometimes call it unconditional cash transfers. But it simply means that money arrives every month or every quarter in the hands of every adult in a community. It's not a huge amount of money. It's maybe $2 a day, but it's enough to ensure the vulnerabilities that these people face, the resilience they need to build, and the decisions they need to have the power over stay in that community. It's very simple. It's very cheap. And we've put together a couple of pilots now in Peru, which we couldn't be more delighted by. More importantly, the people we're working with can be more delighted by. And we think actually this is possibly the secret formula that we then need to scale it. Another way of putting it, I suppose, is that we've done lots and lots of ways to figure out how supporting Indigenous and local communities keeps the rainforest safe. This, we think, is the bit that now needs to be grabbed by much, much deeper pockets than ourselves, by the UN, by national capitals, by national budgets, and scaled up, because if we're serious about addressing the climate crisis and we're serious about halting deforestation, this is the way to do it.
Isn't it super interesting to figure out, like, universal basic income is a concept that has become much more popular in recent years, also like in the Western societies. And even though we have, in comparison, we have a lot, and we are not in a position where we can protect the environment so much and make such a big difference, that now you as an NGO, you can just go in and, well, really make a difference in communities and indigenous communities who live in the rainforest, who do not have as much as we have, yet they can make a much bigger impact to see, like, well, how that plays out.
Absolutely. And, basic income is a fascinating area that we can, go down a real rabbit hole on. And some people say, won't they spend it on vice? Is this fair? Should we really be? Doing this costs a fraction of what is being invested in rainforest protection using traditional conservation approaches. It's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of what's going into climate finance to address this issue. And at the end of the day, you have 400 million people living in the rainforest. You have 1.2 billion who are depending on those rainforests for their livelihoods. It's a very, very cost-effective way of just keeping those people safe and, living lives which they have chosen for themselves over the long term. Because without it, the rainforest being destroyed is going to cause extraordinary problems for so many, many people. So, yeah, it's a really interesting area. Basic income, we feel that whilst some people, feel they need to become happy with it and acquainted for it, in terms of bang for buck and in terms of equity and fairness, it cannot be beaten. Yeah.
You also highlighted the long term quite a few times of this. Give us a little bit of an outlook. What are your future plans with Cool Earth? Do you have anything on the horizon there already? What you say you want to tackle in the future, or how you want to go along there?
We do. So, we're very aware that we improve what we do every year. We sometimes do one step back and two steps forward, but we're still learning a lot. In terms of our approach of giving unconditional resources to local communities, we think we've now built a really good mousetrap. We've got 16 years under our belts. We can point to really great impact figures. And we can also point to a very wide library of scholarship that's looked at how you protect rainforests effectively using this method. So I suppose the key thing on the horizon is scaling and demonstrating that we have built a prototype that you can use in any rainforest region, in any rainforest nation, anywhere in the world, to protect rainforests from the grassroots up. We're very conscious that there are lots of ways of protecting rainforests. You can do it from the national level, from the international level, but whenever you do that through funding coming from Norway or Sweden or the US or Brazil enacting new laws, the only thing that will ensure it sustains is getting buy-in from people on the ground. And what we have developed, as I say, is a prototype to do that very simply, very fairly, very straightforwardly.
Yes. Perfect transition again. If our listeners, if we want to support you, if we want to support the people on the ground, what would be the best way for us?
Well, I mean, we're a very straightforward charity. You can donate to us, obviously, on our website, coolearth.org, and we will keep you up to date with exactly what we do with your cash. We're also developing some really exciting, let's call them products for want of a better word. You'll be able to donate to us on a Wednesday, and that cash will arrive in the hands of rainforest communities by the Friday. We're looking at ways very much boosted by some very generous supporters where 99 cents in every dollar actually arrives where you want it to, because we feel this is an approach that is so clear and so fair that we do need to make it as accessible as possible to as many people. On top of that, we need ambassadors. I'll be honest with you. I mean, you've been a terrific ambassador for us, and many people who subscribe to you and support you have gone on to tell their friends. And again, we need more and more of those, because ultimately we're a small charity with a big idea that has huge impact. We just need to make people comfortable to amplify that.
Now, we will also put all the information into the show notes. I just want to iterate the concept that I like so much about giving directly. It's not just that we're able to give directly to the people who then can use the money the most effective way, but it's much more direct in terms of I can give it, let's say today, and 2 days later, the money already arrives, which can't be much more immediate as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we take the amount of funding we get very seriously. I mean, we know a lot of people are supporting us who, one, have numerous other options in terms of charities, but also, this is hard-earned cash. We want to guarantee you that cash works very hard to address the climate crisis. And we firmly believe the model the team and our partner communities have put together is best in class.
Before we go into the final part and have a look at your learnings as well along the journey, and what you want to share with us, is there anything that we forgot about talking so far that you want to mention with us? So?
That's very kind. I suppose it's worth flagging that the numbers that we talk about in terms of rainforest protection are sometimes worth repeating because they're so stark. If we lose the rainforest, that's 800 billion tons of CO2 equivalent that could go into the atmosphere. I mean, it won't happen overnight, but I mean, that's 200 years of peak oil and gas. And therefore, in terms of the priority we give to this, I think the 10-15% of emissions doesn't do it justice. This really is, in the words of, Professor Johan Rockström, one of our trustees and a really enthusiastic ambassador for Cool Earth, is that if we're going to stay within a safe living space and not cross those boundaries when things really do start to wobble, keeping the rainforest safe is a top 3 priority.
Now let's take a little shift as well and have a look at your personal reflections as well. Since working with Cool Earth, how has that impacted your personal life as well?
I used to do a lot of travel when I was in banking. I then did huge amounts of travel with Cool Earth, and I've realized now I don't need to travel. There are very smart people on the ground. There are very smart people who will do, what I thought I needed to do in the past, which is great news. So maybe not for my family. I'm around a great deal more. But that's kind of connected to another big insight, if you can call it that I have. Namely, I'm director, CEO, whatever, of the charity, which is a huge privilege. The big thing I need to realize is that the fewer decisions I take, the better. The fewer times I intervene and say, no, let's go from that and do this, the better. Because I believe very firmly, and this is my team will roll their eyes at me saying this, I believe very firmly in this term subsidiarity, which is a funny old word, but it basically means take every decision as close as possible to the consequence of that decision as you can. So just as we give cash, because cash, this magical commodity that enables people to take decisions in the here and now, our team should be doing exactly the same. So our field workers, our program managers should be the ones who actually decide how we navigate the difficulties that Cool Earth will always come up against. Equally, our fundraisers are very much focused on actually just having conversations with the people who give us. And I'm very free with my email. I'm always keen to have a conversation, as are they, because it's actually, giving them the ability to influence and persuade and explain at the precise interpersonal level that's key. Equally, with our team, we used to have 50, 60% in Europe. We now have less than 20% here. Mm-hmm. And we have our fundraising teams growing fastest in Papua New Guinea and Peru. We have our new programs growing fastest in Congo, Papua New Guinea and Peru as well. And I think that's the thing I've learned. The less I do, in many cases, the better.
So basically not just giving money directly, but then also empowering people and giving them, the ability to take the decisions that they know best for their environment, for their work.
Yeah, I mean, one of our trustees, the wonderful Frank Field, who has an extraordinary career as a social activist and a politician, he always said, if you want to make change, work with the grain of human nature, because it will happen. Yeah. And actually getting there and being at 90 degrees to people, getting there and sort of suggesting a headlock is needed to persuade, that's never going to work. That's never going to sustain. But a family that lives in the rainforest will have exactly the same anxieties and ambitions for their children as you and I do. Yeah. And actually supporting that grain of human nature is the best way of cutting through and achieving, what our ambition is, mainly to halt tropical deforestation.
Nice. Now let's already go over to the final question. If you had to share one tip of our audience with us, how we could become more impactful, what would your number one tip be?
Dig deep and be curious. Any charity where you can't actually, at some point, talk to someone on the ground, talk to someone in management, talk to someone in fundraising over the phone to really understand what's going on, probably don't deserve your cash. I am a huge believer that we have a great story to tell. We have great data to share, but we need to be interrogated. So that's my top tip. Dig deep.
Beautiful. Well, thanks so much for being here with us, Matthew. And
thank you, Dennis.
Thanks so much for the great work you're doing with Cool Earth as well.
It's a real pleasure to talk to you. Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, my pleasure. And to everyone else, thanks so much for joining us as well, and stay impactful.